Hello, welcome to tonight's vodcast for November 3rd, a special Let's Go Giants edition as we celebrate the parade today. And I'm sure on your ways home you saw more people celebrating and enjoying the World Series. I figured what better way for us to continue celebrating than to do some social studies homework. So I hope you enjoy this as much as I think you will. Today we're going to be looking at some more ways that the French helped and that the war starts spreading a little bit more. Next slide. The first thing we're looking at is the French actually arriving. One of the big things we talked about, France supplied guns and weapons and soldiers and leaders and all that, but a huge thing that they provide is that they convince Spain to also help the Americans. Spain and France were really good friends, and so once France got involved, they said to Spain, hey, look, we're fighting in this war. You guys should do it too. As you can see on the map here, an arrow pointing to Baton Rouge, which is the capital of Louisiana today. There and where Natchez is, they had a lot of forts, because remember, that whole area still belonged to Spain, just like Florida and there. So in those forts, the Spanish are able to attack the British that are over there. Before then, the British had some forces there and were planning to attack the Americans from the south. So they were going to move from the south upward and kind of, surprise the Americans. But once the Spanish moved in, they couldn't do that because they were being attacked every day, which you can imagine isn't that pleasant. Next slide. Because of this, the British Army becomes divided between fighting the Spanish in the south and the Americans and French in the north. So whereas before the British could use all of their soldiers and weapons on the Americans, now they need to share those resources. They need to send soldiers to the south to fight Spain, and they also didn't know if France was going to attack them in England or in the West Indies or in their other colonies, so they had to take soldiers away from there and send them to these other places. In your notebook, I want you to answer this question. How would or why would France and Spain helping the Americans cause Britain to send their soldiers to other places? If we look at the leadership that France provided, one was the Marquis. So Marquis is not his name, it's a title. The Marquis de Lafayette. He was 19 years old. Think about that. 19. He's living in France, and he volunteers to join George Washington's army. He really believed in the American cause. He loved this idea of freedom, of people running the government, and he said, I want to help. So George Washington puts him in charge of one of the armies. He commanded an army division, and his soldiers at first were like, oh, who's this French guy coming in? We've been fighting all this time, and this guy's just going to walk in and tell us what to do. But he earned their respect because he never thought that he was better than them. He ate the same food as them. He had the same supplies as them. He slept, in the same areas that they slept in. And so they really gained a lot of respect for him. He also used his own money to buy supplies like clothes and food for all the other soldiers. And I'm sure you guys know that when people buy you things, you tend to like them a little bit more. And that's what Lafayette does. I want you to answer in your notebook, of all these things that Lafayette did, which do you think got him the most respect? Which of these things that Lafayette did got him the most respect from the other soldiers? Next slide. Another thing that Marquis Lafayette does is he convinces King Louis to send 6,000 more soldiers, a 6,000-man French army to America. I mean, that's huge. That is a substantial amount of soldiers, and they're not just, it's not just people, but we're also talking about trained soldiers that can really help in war. So this was a huge accomplishment. Another guy that came over is the Baron von Steuben. Baron von Steuben. I love that name. I wonder what I would have to do to get a title like Baron. Maybe you guys can, instead of calling me Mr. Avento, you can start calling me Baron von Avento. I think it has a nice ring to it. He helps train the American soldiers to prepare for war. So they, when people would enlist in the army, they would go to him. He would teach them how to use a gun. He would teach them how to use a bayonet. He would teach them how to survive in certain areas. So this once untrained army is slowly becoming a more professional army, which they're going to need for the winter of 1777. As you heard the other day, when General Howe forced the Americans out of Philadelphia, that was right before winter. That was in August or September, and winter was fast approaching. And the Americans go to Valley Forge, which is in Pennsylvania. And this winter was brutally cold. We talked about the other winters. This one was the worst. And the army was in really bad shape. Most of the men didn't have boots. They didn't have socks. As they marched places, they left bloodstains in the snow because they had no way to control their bleeding. There were no bandages. And this is what Marquis de Lafayette says. He gives a quote to a newspaper, and this is his quote. I want you to listen carefully because I'm going to ask you a question on it. The unfortunate soldiers were in want of everything. They had neither coats, nor hats, nor shirts, nor shoes. Their feet and their legs froze till they grew black, and it was often necessary to amputate them. That means to cut off. The army frequently passed whole days without food. That was the Marquis de Lafayette. So, it's really, I know it's tough for you to imagine, but these guys were considered it lucky to just live another 5 minutes, and yet they continue fighting. George Washington became incredibly angry with the Continental Congress. He continually asked them for money, he asked them for supplies, he asked them for help, but the Congress was very slow. They did not respond quickly. I want you to answer in your notebook, why do you think the Congress did not respond quickly with supplies and money for Washington's troops? Many soldiers wanted to desert. That is a vocabulary word, desert. Not like the chocolate cake or the ice cream that you have after dinner, although that does sound pretty good. But desert, which means to leave military duty without intending to return. So to kind of just say, you know what, I'm done with this place, I'll see you guys later. Although many of them wanted to do that, most of them stayed because they were committed to George Washington and the American cause. In your notebook, I want you to write down, what does that mean, the American cause? Next slide. For your final assignment today, which you can do online or on binder paper, I want you to imagine that you are Marquis de Lafayette. I've already given you a quote of his and some information from him. And I want you to pretend that you're him and you've just arrived to America and you meet the soldiers you're going to be fighting with. You've met George Washington, you've spoken with him, you've met some of the soldiers and the other commanders, and you just get back to your tent and you want to write a letter home to a friend. What's your experience like? You've just got there, you've just met these people. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What's going through your mind? As I said, you can either do that on the website or on binder paper. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's podcast, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Have a great night. Let's go Giants.